I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the construction trucks blocking my driveway. At first, I thought it was just some road work. But when I stepped outside and saw the massive wooden beams being hauled onto my property, my stomach dropped. What the hell is going on here? I shouted, storming toward the nearest worker. The guy, wearing a reflective vest and looking half asleep, barely glanced at me. "New HOA Clubhouse," he muttered. I blinked. "Excuse me." He gestured to the mess of lumber and concrete forms. "We're building the neighborhood clubhouse. HOA approved it." Something inside me snapped. This is my land. Before he could respond, I heard the unmistakable clack of heels on pavement. Then came the voice I dreaded. "Kyle, you should really learn to read the notices we send." I turned to see Karren Jettison, the HOA president, standing there with her clipboard clutched against her chest like it was some kind of holy text. Her perfectly styled blonde bob didn't even shift in the breeze, and her smug expression made my blood boil. "This is my private road," I said, jabbing a finger at the construction site. "I own it, not the HOA." Karren let out a haughty laugh. "Oh, Kyle, you're mistaken. This road is part of the community, and the HOA board voted to utilize it for the clubhouse. It's for the good of the neighborhood." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "No. I bought this property with a private road leading to my home. I have the deed. I pay property taxes on it. You have no right to build here." She waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, that's just a technicality. The community needs this clubhouse, and frankly, you're the only one being difficult about it." "Difficult?" My voice rose. "You're building a literal structure on my land without my permission." Karren crossed her arms. "The board has already decided. We sent out notices, held a vote. Democracy, Kyle. You can't just stand in the way of progress because you want to be difficult." I clenched my fists. "You can't vote to steal someone's property." She sighed dramatically. "Kyle, if you have a complaint, you can take it up at the next HOA meeting. In the meantime, please don't interfere with construction." I stared at her, incredulous. "You're trespassing." She smiled. "No, we're improving the neighborhood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real work to do." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me fuming next to the construction site. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. "Mark, I need you to meet me at my place. The HOA is trying to steal my land." Mark sighed. "Again? This time, they've started building a clubhouse on my damn road." There was a pause. "Then I'll be there in an hour." I hung up and looked at the half-built framework already taking shape on my property. They had no idea what they'd just started. Kyle paced near the construction site, jaw tight as the workers continued hammering away at the wooden framework. He couldn't just stand there watching them steal his land plank by plank. His lawyer, Mark, arrived exactly when he said he would, stepping out of his car with a leather briefcase in one hand and an expression that was already bordering on exasperated. Mark took one look at the half-built structure and exhaled sharply. "You weren't exaggerating." Kyle gestured at the mess. "They're building an entire clubhouse on my road like they own the place." Mark adjusted his glasses as he walked toward the construction foreman, a burly man in his 50s who was barking orders at his crew. "Who's in charge here?" The foreman barely glanced at him. "I report to Karren Jettison. If you got a problem, take it up with her." Mark pulled a folder from his briefcase, flipping it open. "You're trespassing on private property. This road is legally owned by Kyle, as per his deed and property records. You need to cease construction immediately before this becomes a legal matter." The foreman let out a dry chuckle. "Lady said HOA approved it. My job's to build what I'm paid to build." Kyle stepped forward. "Then you're all complicit in property theft." The foreman shrugged. "Not my problem, pal." Mark snapped the folder shut. "Fine. You've been officially warned. Any further construction will be documented as criminal trespassing and property damage." The man's expression didn't change, but he hesitated for the first time. Kyle and Mark turned to leave, but before they could take 2 steps, Karren's voice rang out from behind them. "Mark, I should have known you'd show up." They turned to face her. She stood with her arms crossed, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Mark didn't waste time. "Karren, you have no legal right to build here. You're trespassing, and you know it." Karren tilted her head, feigning innocence. "The HOA has jurisdiction over community improvements." Mark pulled out another document. "Kyle's deed explicitly states this road is private property, not HOA-controlled land." You didn't even attempt to get an easement or legal authorization. She waved a hand dismissively. That's a matter of interpretation. Mark's face hardened. No, it isn't. You're violating state property laws, not to mention committing fraud by misrepresenting your authority to these workers. Karren let out a slow breath as if she were dealing with children. Fine, take it up with the board. But the clubhouse stays. Kyle's patience snapped. Like hell it does. Mark pulled out his phone. We'll be filing an immediate injunction. The second I submit this, every dollar you've spent on this project is wasted. You'll be personally liable for damages. Karren's smile faltered. That's ridiculous. Kyle crossed his arms. Is it? Because I'm also filing a police report for trespassing and destruction of property. Karren's confidence wavered for the first time. Kyle, be reasonable. This is for the good of the neighborhood. Mark shook his head. You don't get to redefine reasonable when you're stealing land. Kyle turned to the foreman. If you don't stop construction now, every single one of you will be included in the lawsuit. Your company, your workers, everyone. The foreman glanced at Karren. You never mentioned any of that. Karren stiffened. Because it's not real. Mark began dialing a number. We'll let the judge decide that. The foreman hesitated, then turned to his crew. Hold up. Stop work. The workers immediately paused, some looking at each other in confusion. Karren's face darkened. You can't do this, she snapped. Kyle raised an eyebrow. You mean I can't stop you from illegally building on my land? Karren's expression twisted. This isn't over. Mark smiled coldly. No, it isn't. But I promise you won't like how it ends. Karren spun on her heel and stormed off, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. The foreman gave Kyle an apologetic nod before walking away, leaving the half-built structure abandoned. Kyle looked at Mark. What's next? Mark tucked his phone away. We file the injunction immediately. Then we go after them for damages. Kyle exhaled, tension still thick in his chest. They really thought they could get away with this. Mark's expression was grim. They still might try. Be ready for anything. Kyle nodded. I always am. Kyle barely slept that night, the sound of hammers and saws still ringing in his ears even though construction had finally stopped. He kept his security cameras rolling, just in case Karren decided to try something under the cover of darkness. By morning, he was already on the phone with Mark, confirming that the injunction had been filed. Now it was a waiting game. He stepped out onto his porch, coffee in hand, and spotted a few neighbors hovering near the half-built clubhouse. A group of them stood whispering, occasionally glancing toward his house. He recognized some of them: Tim, who lived 2 doors down and always had an opinion on everything, and Denise, who had been on the HOA board for years but usually kept quiet. Kyle took a deep breath, deciding it was better to face the rumors head-on rather than let Karren control the narrative. He walked across the gravel driveway toward them, nodding in greeting. Morning, he said. Denise hesitated before speaking. We heard about the lawsuit. Tim crossed his arms. A lot of us don't understand why you're fighting this so hard. It's just a clubhouse. Kyle's grip tightened around his mug. It's not just a clubhouse. It's my property. The HOA doesn't own this road, and they had no right to start building on it. Denise looked uncomfortable. Karren said the board approved it. Kyle let out a dry laugh. Of course she did. And did she mention that the HOA has zero legal claim to my land? Or that they'll be personally liable for every dollar wasted on this project? Tim frowned. But it's for the neighborhood. Everyone will benefit. Kyle met his gaze. So you'd be fine if the HOA decided to build something in the middle of your driveway? Tim opened his mouth, then closed it again. Denise sighed. Look, I get why you're upset, but this is going to get messy. Karren's already telling people you're trying to ruin things for everyone. Kyle shook his head. I'm not the one who started this. They did. And I'm not backing down. Denise glanced around and lowered her voice. You should know Karren's calling an emergency HOA meeting tonight. She's pushing to pass some kind of retroactive approval to justify the build. Kyle's jaw tightened. That won't change anything legally. Denise hesitated before adding, that's not the only thing. She's also talking about fining you for obstructing community development. Kyle exhaled sharply. They're making up rules as they go. Tim shifted uncomfortably. You really think you can win this? Kyle met his gaze. I know I can. Denise looked uncertain, but she gave him a small nod before walking away. Tim followed, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Kyle didn't care. He wasn't fighting for approval, he was fighting for his rights. Later that evening, Kyle arrived at the HOA meeting, knowing full well that Karren had likely stacked the room with her supporters. He walked in to find the community center packed, residents murmuring among themselves. Karren stood at the front, her ever-present clipboard in hand, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She cleared her throat. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a civil discussion. We're all neighbors, after all. Kyle took a seat near the front, arms crossed. Karren smiled sweetly. As you all know, we've begun construction on a much-needed community clubhouse. However, one resident has decided to challenge this project, forcing us to take unnecessary legal measures. Kyle leaned forward. You mean the legal measures necessary to stop you from stealing private property? A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karren's smile tightened. Let's stay on topic. The board has reviewed the situation and will be voting on a measure to officially designate the clubhouse as an HOA-approved structure. This will ensure that no further disruptions occur. Kyle didn't bother to hide his disdain. You can't just vote to take land that doesn't belong to you. Karren's tone turned patronizing. Kyle, the community has a say in how we grow. That's how HOAs work. Kyle pulled out a folder from his bag. And the law has a say in what's legal. I have the property deed, the tax records, and now an official injunction. Any attempt to continue construction will be met with immediate legal action. Some of the board members exchanged uneasy glances. Karren's lips pressed into a thin line. Kyle, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Kyle tilted his head. No, Karren. I'm making sure you don't get away with this. She turned to the board. Let's put it to a vote. All in favor of approving the clubhouse. A few hands went up, but there was hesitation. Others kept their hands firmly down. Karren's expression flickered with frustration. This is for the community. We can't allow one person to derail progress. Kyle stood. You mean you can't allow one person to stop your power trip? The room fell silent. Karren straightened. Regardless of this vote, the HOA has the authority to impose fines for obstruction. And we will. Kyle's lips curled into a slow smile. Then I hope you're ready to explain to a judge why you're punishing someone for defending their own property. The board members looked increasingly nervous. Karren's grip on her clipboard tightened. The meeting is adjourned. Kyle watched as she hurried out, knowing full well she wasn't done scheming. But neither was he. Kyle left the HOA meeting knowing Karren was far from finished. She had backed down in front of the crowd, but that was just a tactical retreat. He had seen the way her jaw had tightened, the way her grip on her clipboard had turned white-knuckled. She wasn't used to losing, and she certainly wasn't going to accept it gracefully. The next morning, Kyle stepped outside to check on the abandoned construction site. The workers had packed up, leaving behind a skeletal frame of what was supposed to be the clubhouse. It was an eyesore, but at least it wasn't growing any bigger. He snapped a few more pictures for documentation before heading back inside to grab breakfast. Before he could sit down, his phone buzzed. It was Mark. Got some news, Mark said as soon as Kyle answered. Karren's trying to push through a new set of HOA bylaws. She's claiming they'll allow retroactive approval of structures built on what she calls underutilized community space. Kyle exhaled sharply. Underutilized? It's my driveway. She's twisting language to justify what she's already done, Mark said. She knows she's in trouble, so she's scrambling to cover her tracks. Kyle leaned against the counter, rubbing the bridge of his nose. What are the odds the board falls for it? Mark hesitated. Normally I'd say slim, but Karren has influence, and she's been framing you as anti-community. If she gets enough people on her side, she might convince them this is just a bureaucratic issue. Kyle's grip on his phone tightened. So what do we do? I already filed the injunction, but we need to escalate, Mark said. I've been looking into federal property laws, and I found something interesting. Karren's little power play might have violated a federal statute, not just local property laws. Kyle straightened. What statute? The Clean Water Act. Kyle frowned. How does that apply? Mark sounded almost amused. Your property includes a runoff drainage area that connects to a nearby stream. That means any construction on your land has to comply with federal environmental regulations. Karren didn't just overstep HOA authority, she may have triggered a federal investigation. Kyle let out a low whistle. That's perfect. Already filed a report with the Environmental Protection Agency, Mark said. If they take it seriously, Karren won't just be dealing with local courts, she'll have federal inspectors breathing down her neck. Kyle grinned. Let's see how she handles that. 2 days later, a pair of government vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Kyle watched from his porch as 2 agents stepped out wearing dark blue jackets with the Environmental Protection Agency logo emblazoned on the back. They walked straight toward the half-built clubhouse, scanning the area before approaching his house. One of them, a tall man with a no-nonsense expression, introduced himself. Mr. Calloway? I'm Agent Morrison with the EPA. We received a report about unauthorized construction on protected land. Kyle shook his hand. That's right. The HOA started building on my private road without permission. They never checked for environmental impact, and I doubt they pulled permits. Morrison nodded. We'll need to see documentation. Kyle handed over the folder Mark had prepared. Morrison flipped through the pages, occasionally exchanging glances with his partner. This is exactly what we needed, Morrison said. We'll begin our investigation immediately. Kyle watched as the agents walked back toward the clubhouse, taking measurements and snapping photos. He barely had time to enjoy the moment before he spotted Karren marching toward them, her heels clicking furiously against the pavement. You can't just show up here and start taking pictures, she snapped. Morrison didn't even blink. Ma'am, we're with the Environmental Protection Agency. This site is under federal review. Karren scoffed. Federal? That's ridiculous. This is a local HOA matter. Morrison pulled out a clipboard. This land contains a runoff drainage area that connects to a federally protected waterway. Any construction requires environmental clearance, which, based on our preliminary findings, was never obtained. Karren's face turned a deep shade of red. That's absurd. The HOA has full authority over community improvements. Morrison flipped a page. According to property records, this land is privately owned. The HOA has no legal claim to it. And even if it did, the lack of environmental clearance alone is enough to halt construction indefinitely. Karren's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Morrison turned to his partner. We'll be issuing a cease and desist order effective immediately. Karren finally found her voice. You can't do that. Morrison gave her an even stare. Ma'am, if you continue interfering with a federal investigation, you'll be facing more than just a property dispute. Kyle didn't bother hiding his grin as Karren's face twisted in fury. She spun on her heel and stormed off, likely to plot her next move. But this time, she wasn't just dealing with him, she was up against the federal government. Morrison handed Kyle a copy of the cease and desist order. If they attempt any further construction, contact us immediately. Kyle shook his hand again. Will do. As the agents drove away, Kyle leaned against his porch railing, watching Karren's house. He could already imagine her pacing inside, trying to figure out how to spin this disaster. She had underestimated him. She had thought he was just another homeowner she could steamroll. Now, she was learning the hard way that some battles couldn't be won with a clipboard and a fake smile. This fight wasn't over, but Kyle had the upper hand. And he intended to keep it. Kyle spent the next several days watching the fallout unfold. The cease and desist order had stopped construction cold, but it had also sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. Karren had spent years ruling the HOA with an iron grip, and now, for the first time, residents were openly questioning her leadership. He noticed more neighbors stopping by the unfinished clubhouse, whispering amongst themselves, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright frustration. The carefully cultivated image Karren had built that she was always in control, always making the best decisions for the community, was beginning to crack. Kyle wasn't about to let her wiggle out of this, though. He knew Karren well enough to realize that she'd try to find a way to salvage her position. The question was, how desperate would she get? His answer came when he checked his mail. A thick envelope from the HOA sat among his usual bills and advertisements. He tore it open and scanned the contents. A formal notice of violation claiming he was obstructing community progress and owed the HOA a hefty fine for non-compliance with board directives. Kyle didn't even bother getting angry. This was desperate even for Karren. The fine had no legal basis and she had to know it. She was throwing everything at the wall, hoping something would stick. He grabbed his phone and called Mark. His lawyer answered on the second ring, already sounding amused. Let me guess. Karren sent you a ridiculous fine. Kyle read off the amount. She wants $5,000 for obstructing HOA-approved construction. Mark let out a low chuckle. She really doesn't know when to quit. That fine is worthless. She can't charge you for stopping an illegal build. Kyle leaned against the kitchen counter. I assume we're adding this to the lawsuit? Already on it. This actually helps us. It shows she's doubling down on retaliation. Kyle exhaled, shaking his head. She's going to keep pushing until she has no other options left. Mark's tone turned serious. And when people like her run out of options, they get reckless. Stay alert. Kyle didn't need the warning. He had already installed extra security cameras around his property, covering every angle of the unfinished clubhouse and the private road leading to his home. If Karren tried anything sneaky, he'd have it all on tape. Later that evening, he noticed something strange. Several board members were walking door to door, speaking with residents. Some people nodded along while others looked skeptical. Whatever Karren was selling, it wasn't getting the full buy-in she was hoping for. Kyle didn't have to wait long to find out what she was up to. The next morning, a notice was taped to his front door. An emergency HOA vote was scheduled for the following night. The topic: a new bylaw allowing the HOA to claim underutilized community spaces for development. Kyle let out a slow breath. She was trying to rewrite the rules to justify her land grab after the fact. He wasn't going to let that happen. When he arrived at the meeting the next night, the tension in the room was thick. Residents filled every seat, some standing along the back wall. Even people who usually didn't bother attending had shown up, sensing that something big was happening. Karren stood at the front of the room, posture stiff but with the same carefully crafted smile she always wore in public. She waited until the murmuring died down before beginning. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "Tonight, we're here to discuss an important step forward for our community. We have a unique opportunity to expand our shared spaces, but unfortunately, we've encountered resistance that threatens to stall progress." Kyle didn't miss the way some people shifted uncomfortably at her words. She was trying to paint him as the villain, but not everyone was buying it. She continued, "To ensure that this project can move forward, the board is proposing an amendment to our bylaws. This will allow us to officially designate underutilized spaces for community enhancement." Kyle stood before she could continue. "You mean you want to rewrite the rules so you can steal private property?" A few gasps rippled through the crowd. Karren's smile tightened, but she kept her tone light. "Kyle, that's not what this is about. This is about making sure our neighborhood continues to grow in a way that benefits everyone." Kyle crossed his arms. "You mean it benefits you? Because last I checked, stealing land and ignoring federal regulations doesn't help anyone." Karren's grip on her clipboard tightened. "This isn't theft. The road in question is used by the entire community, which makes it a shared space." Kyle pulled out a folder and held it up. "My deed says otherwise. And so does the cease and desist order from the EPA." A few board members looked uneasy. One of them, Denise, cleared her throat. "Karren, are we even allowed to override property deeds with an HOA bylaw?" Karren shot her a sharp look, but Denise didn't back down. Kyle pressed on. "You can't just vote your way into owning land that isn't yours. And if you try, this is only going to get worse for you." Karren lifted her chin. "The board has the authority to make decisions for the good of the neighborhood." Kyle let out a dry laugh. "Not when it violates state and federal law." A deep voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. "He's right." All heads turned to a man standing near the door. Agent Morrison from the EPA stepped forward, holding a folder. Karren's face paled. Morrison didn't waste time. "I'm here to formally notify you that continued attempts to develop the disputed land will result in federal penalties. This HOA has already violated environmental regulations, and if you attempt to override private property rights, you'll be facing criminal charges." The room was dead silent. Kyle watched as Karren's carefully constructed composure crumbled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Morrison continued, "The Clubhouse project is officially terminated. Any further action to continue it will be considered a criminal act." Denise turned to Karren, disbelief in her eyes. "You told us everything was legal." Several other board members murmured in agreement. Karren clenched her jaw. I was acting in the best interest of the community." Tim, the neighbor who had initially defended Karren, shook his head. "You lied to us. The room erupted in whispers. Karren's face was a mask of fury, but she had no more moves left. She had lost. Morrison turned to Kyle. "If you have any further issues, let us know." Kyle nodded. "Will do." As the agent left, the board members quickly moved to adjourn the meeting. Residents lingered, murmuring among themselves, some openly glaring at Karren as she gathered her things and stormed out. Kyle watched her go, knowing she wouldn't recover from this. Her hold over the HOA was shattered. Walking out of the meeting, he felt something he hadn't in weeks. Satisfaction. Karren had played her last card, and she had lost. Badly. And Kyle? He had won. Kyle woke up the next morning with a sense of finality settling over him. The HOA meeting had been a disaster for Karren, and there was no coming back from it. The clubhouse project was dead, the board was in turmoil, and the neighborhood had seen the full extent of her overreach. But Kyle wasn't about to let his guard down just yet. He stepped outside to check on the abandoned construction site. The framework stood like a skeleton of Karren's failed ambition, half-built and utterly useless. The workers hadn't returned, and the site was eerily quiet. It was only a matter of time before the HOA had to deal with the cost of removing it. As he stood there, Denise walked up, her expression a mix of embarrassment and relief. "I owe you an apology," she said without hesitation. Kyle crossed his arms, waiting. "I should have questioned Karren sooner. I knew something felt off, but I let her steamroll me," she admitted. "A lot of us did." Kyle nodded. "At least you see it now. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She inhaled deeply. "We're calling an emergency board meeting." "Without her?" Kyle raised an eyebrow. "She lost all credibility last night," Denise continued. "The board is turning on her. She lied to us, put the HOA in legal trouble, and made decisions without approval. If we don't act now, she'll try to salvage what's left of her influence." Kyle considered that. "You planning to remove her?" Denise nodded. "We have the votes. It's time." For the first time in weeks, Kyle felt a real sense of victory. Karren had ruled the HOA with intimidation and manipulation, but now her own board was ready to throw her out. Denise hesitated before adding, "We also need to fix this mess she left behind. The construction site, the fines she tried to impose, all of it. We're going to formally rescind everything and return any funds she misused." Kyle gave her a sharp look. "She took money?" Denise sighed. "She authorized payments to the contractors without full board approval. Now that the project is dead, we have to figure out how much was spent and where it came from." Kyle shook his head. "You'll want to audit everything. If she funneled HOA funds into this, she could be facing more than just board removal." She nodded grimly. "We intend to." Later that evening, Kyle watched from his porch as cars pulled into the community center parking lot. The emergency board meeting was happening without Karren, and the weight of that was not lost on him. By the time Denise called, her voice was calm but firm. "She's out. Unanimous vote." Kyle let out a slow breath. "We're also moving to dissolve several of the ridiculous fines she pushed through," Denise continued. "And we've begun reviewing all HOA financial records. If we find anything suspicious, we'll escalate it to legal authorities." Kyle had no doubt they would. The next morning, he received an email from Mark. Attached was a notice confirming that the HOA had formally withdrawn all claims to his property. It was official. They had admitted, in writing, that they had no right to his land. 2 days later, Karren's house went up for sale. Kyle wasn't surprised. She had lost everything: her position, her influence, and any remaining goodwill from the neighborhood. There was no way she could stay. As he stood on his porch, watching a realtor hammer a for sale sign into her front yard, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had underestimated him. She had thought she could rewrite the rules, bend the law, and manipulate the community into backing her. But in the end, she had built her power on nothing more than arrogance and deception. And when the truth came out, it all collapsed. Kyle took one last look at the half-built clubhouse, knowing it would soon be torn down. Justice had been served, and he had won.